Now, these two presidents have a history that goes back for several years. President Trump has also said on numerous occasions that he thinks that his, I guess, relationship with Putin could work in his favor. What role do you think that the relationship that these two have developed over the past will play in the talks that they're going to be having a little bit later on this evening?
Right. Yeah. So Trump and Putin have met about 6 times in his first term. So this will be the first time they meet face to face. And yes, they were pretty warm and cordial in his first term. But since then, President Trump has expressed a lot of frustration with President Putin because, in his words, he said that he's been tapping him along, not being super serious about actually an end to the fighting. So, so that is part of what's going on here. I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Well, it was just more so what role do you think that the relationship that they've developed in the past would that
Yes,
be a
yes,
help
yes.
or aid
So
to this
it's
to these talks?
so yes, yes. Sorry about that. Yes, the personal relationship is very important with not just with President Trump and President Putin, but throughout U.S.-Russia relations. The presidential rapport or lack of rapport has been instrumental in moving things along in a positive way in terms of arms control agreements, in terms of the end of the Cold War, with Reagan and Gorbachev being really seriously historic summits. Um, so yes, I do think that does play a big role, and the fact that Trump is able to re the fact that Putin and Trump seem to have a positive rapport is would help push these discussions along. So yes, it's very important.
And these talks are also happening in Alaska. What do you think is the significance, if any, on choosing that location when these two could have really picked to meet anywhere in the world? Why do you think that they ended up settling on meeting in Alaska with Putin, now coming to U.S. soil?
Yes, it's really interesting because Alaska used to be a Russian colony until 1867. And at that point, Russia had lost the Crimean War and needed to replenish its coffers. And so they asked the United States to buy Alaska. And at the time, William Seward was the Secretary of State. And if you've heard the term Seward's folly, he was criticized a lot because paid $7 million about for Alaska, and they saw it as this frozen wasteland, his critics. Of course, now we know that um, that wasn't a wasteland at all. There's incredible resources and minerals in Alaska, and so it's fitting that not only because we purchased Alaska from Russia, but also that it was on that sale, that purchase was on the tail of Russia losing war in Crimea, which of course right now it has also taken over Crimea in 2015,
Now,
2014, 20.
now we know that there's been this ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine for the last 3.5 years or so. Ukraine is not invited to these talks that are happening a little bit later today. What role do you think they play, and what do you think happens for them, I guess, after these meetings?
Well, to his credit, President Trump talked to President Zelensky, Ukrainian President Zelensky, and some of the European leaders that he has positive relationships with, to kind of strategize what will go into this, what Trump will have in mind when he goes into discussions. He said that he will touch base with President Zelensky and the Europeans after the call. So that would all be a positive. Of course, it's not always clear or certain how President Trump will act when he has these meetings with Putin. So that's a wild card. But in general, at least at this point, at this stage, it seems like the Ukrainians will be brought into it. And at least officially, Zelensky has said he feels comfortable with this phased procession of first talking to Putin and then coming back to Ukraine. For Ukraine, it's the important thing is a ceasefire should happen first before any negotiation on especially territorial issues. And then we could move on to more serious discussions, but first there has to be a halt to the fighting.
And over the last 3.5 years of this war, the United States has poured millions and billions of dollars into helping Ukraine's fight against Russia. You're releasing some new polling data tomorrow on how maybe Americans' views of this war has now shifted. Could you share a little bit more insight on that?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, they were released this morning. So if you go to our website, anyone can see the results. But really interesting shifts. So since last March, which was on the tail of Trump meeting Zelensky in the Oval Office, and it didn't go so well, that meeting. But after that fated meeting, we did a survey, and at that point, 52% supported continuing U.S. military support to Ukraine, meaning giving additional arms and weapons. But now that 52 has turned into 62, so a 10% increase overall. But it's especially high among Republicans. Republicans in March, 30% supported providing additional arms to Ukraine. Now that's 51%. That's a 19-point increase. So that is a huge shift. Independents have also increased 51% to now 61%. And Democrats have always been really positive, so they're staying at about 3/4 supportive. So that's one of the shifts. There's also some shifts on increasing economic aid. A large majority of both Republicans and Democrats, about 3/4, also support tightening sanctions against Russia. And importantly, we asked the question two ways. First, we asked, as we always do you support these policy options for Ukraine? But then we also said, well, if Russia decides to decline a peace agreement, would you still support doing these things? And interestingly, we didn't see a difference at all. So whether Putin agrees or not to moving forward on a peace proposal, or at least a ceasefire, Americans do, in the majority, support continuing aid to Ukraine.
It was very interesting yesterday. President Trump held a press conference from the Oval Office where he said he'll know within the first few minutes of meeting Vladimir Putin whether or not this is going to be a good meeting or a bad meeting. What do you think a win looks like for President Trump following this historic summit with Vladimir Putin? What does that look like specifically for President Trump?
I think at this stage, if he could possibly get Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire with no conditions, just a ceasefire. It doesn't have to be for very long. It'd be great if it were for very long, but a ceasefire until he meets with Zelensky or other Ukrainian officials to discuss, and the Europeans and the Americans. They should all be in a agreement on a fair peace. It's going to be hard to come up with compromises, but for Trump to walk away with a win, it would be Russia agreeing to at least stop the fighting for now.
All right, Dina Smeltz from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Thanks so much for your perspective on this historical summit between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin that will be happening a little bit later on this evening in Alaska. We will definitely have full coverage for you right here on Fox 32 Chicago. Time